researcher at the University of Birmingham in the Department of Philosophy. And she's working on decoloniality and intersectional understanding of ecological freedom. And prior to this, she has obtained a bachelor's in liberal arts from Leiden's University College and a master's degree in healthcare policy innovation management from Maastricht University and another master's in political theory from University of Amsterdam. So what we are talking about today is part of our research interest, specifically decoloniality and post-colonial philosophy, intersectional feminism and critical race. So Sheila, you can take off from there to moderate today's event.
Great, welcome everyone. Really nice to see you here. Thank you, Augustine, for organizing this and for the introduction. It's my honor today to present this meeting and of the African Research Network. And we will start today with Mukile Kasongo. He will give a presentation about African critics of African women writers, and especially with reference to Mariama Ba's novel. Mukile, he has worked in the financial sector before he completed his BA in accounting and finance, which he got from the University of Northumbria. When he completed his BA, he joined the postgraduate certificate in education program at the University of Warwick. He's also taught French and business in local schools and colleges, and studied in Leicester, where he did his MA program in translation studies, both for French and Russian, and then worked as a Russian consumer advisor for Next Directory, as a freelance translator and interpreter for different clients and agencies. And today he is speaking as a researcher from University of Birmingham, who is also a lecturer in French at Abington and Whitney College in Oxfordshire. So very happy to introduce Mukile today and very interested to hear your presentation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks so much, Sheila. And I'm happy to be here and to share with you some of my work. So I'll bring my PowerPoint straight away. I'm just gonna share a portion of my screen. Okay, that's right. I hope you can all see it. Oh, sorry. Okay. Is it showing well? Yeah, it's good. Okay, thank you. I'm just checking. Okay, thank you. So today, I'll just give you briefly what I'm going to talk about today. So I would like to bring in my talk male critics and women writers in the African context. And I will be referring specifically to Mariama Ba's novel. For those of you who don't know who's Mariama Ba, she's an African novelist, and she has written what is considered the first African feminist novel in the 80s. And so I'll start by giving you a brief historical context, just briefly, and to show the position women had. By positionality, understand just your own relation as a person, as a researcher to a given context. You know, that's how I understand it. So I'll start by giving a brief historical context, and then I'll bring it male views and female reaction to male critics, and then I'll bring my own research, which is in translation studies, and then I'll end with a conclusion. Okay, thank you. So just to start, I just want to give you a brief context. In the African context, scholars, they generally agree, you know, that women had a strong position when it comes to oral traditions. So it was something that was done by women, and they had a big role to do it. And also, just give another example, it might be extreme to some, because I am originally from the Congo. In the Congo, we have one ethnic group called Bashilele. It's the only ethnic group in the Congo where polyandry was also polyandry. It's the opposite of polygamy. So women were allowed to have many men, you know, and that also tells you how powerful they were, because she was the queen in her house. She was able to choose the men she wanted, and it was absolutely fine. It was nothing immoral. It was for economic, cultural reasons. So, but it was mainly because she has, as a woman, she had a strong position that she was able to have men. But so we can talk about that, whether it's immoral or not, but that's another discussion. I just want to show you that, you know, the question to ask is, who established this norm in society? Who established that? That's the big question. So, and how then from that point of position to where we are now, where women has less of an important position. So I'll just briefly introduce you to some historical facts. So, and so here I'm bringing Naimeka because I'll be bringing mostly women, women writers, because my research is based on women's writing mostly, even though I'm a man. And I also have to acknowledge that I'm speaking for a man's position, you know, so I don't see through women's lens, and you know, and I also have to say that. So Naimeka mentioned that to understand positionality of women in African context, we need to understand the reason for marginalization, and I agree with her. And one of the reasons for marginalization, it's traditions, you know, and traditions. The main traditions in African context, they tend to bring, and in many parts of the world, they tend to bring women down, and also gender. The fact that someone is a woman can be a disadvantage in society. So that's some of the reason. And Naimeka is calling us to understand the reason, you know, for marginalization, you know, to understand women's position. And here I want to bring a male critic. And I'm bringing you, this is a criticism from a well-known critic and of Mariam Abba novel, So Long a Letter. So Long a Letter is a novel by Mariam Abba. As I said, I will be referring to that. And I want to bring, there are many male critics, but I'm bringing one, and because I think it's a good, that one is a good one to start with. It's a good starting point. So let me bring what he said. Femi has written a critical review of Ba's novel, So Long a Letter. I would advise anyone who has got time to actually read the article, because I'll try to shorten, you know, to give you the main details. But Femi looks like it is a traditionalist in a proper sense. He's a traditionalist, and he has categorized women, African writers, into two. On one side, you have the Flora Nwapa, Amata Adio. She said those one are the old guards, you know, because they are promoting somehow traditions, you know, but at the same time they are complaining. They are complaining, even though we are saying, you know, there's that Mother Africa notion where the, you know, African woman, it's Mother Earth, blah blah blah. So and Femi is very harsh. You know, you can say it's sometimes it's some kind of a misogyny. You know, I would say, and then she said on the other side you have those women like Diallo Mahamaba, the novel I'm referring to, who are crying for liberation. You know, and they are revolting themselves. So they are not. They want repudiation. They want divorce. They're criticizing. They want condemnation. So they're different from the old guard of African writers, and you know, in Femi's code, you can see a lot of the traditions, and there's and as I said before, it's one of the reasons why women are marginalized, and also I want to bring the fact that Femi, speaking from a male lens, does not understand women's position. She doesn't, you know, and I'll try to explain why. African women are doubly subjugated, you know, and because they have been colonized on one hand, and colonization has brought to Africa some norms, you know, from France or from British for those who are the British. So it's some patriarchal norms that were not African, that they've been brought, and women have suffered from that, and as well as in their own country or village, they also had those traditions that were not that were detrimental to them. So generally speaking, scholars agree that African women have been doubly subjugated, and they live in the margins. That's also, so some people refer, they use border zones, you know, like there's so many terms you can use, but living in the margins, like Nyamika is saying there, it's a space of contradictions. Why am I bringing this core? Because it's very important, because if I go back to Femi quote, you know, it's talking about one category of women asking for liberation, and the one complaining about the status quo. So, but it doesn't understand that African women are, you know, on one hand, they look at Western, I would say, some Western ideas of freedom, you know, and you know, and they want to have that sort of freedom, you know, and on the other hand, they don't want to lose their identity as African, you know. So it's a difficult position to be in with, you know. So you want to be an African woman, you want to have an identity as, for example, a Senegalese woman or a Nigerian woman, but at the same time, you want to bring some norms that will liberate you in certain ways, but those ideas are imported, you know. So, and Femi is just using that to say, look, to criticize Mayamaba, and to say, Mayamaba, your brand of feminist is imported, it's westernized, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, so that's the difficulty of African women in general. So they live in that space where they have to balance, you know, they want African traditions, they want to balance some ideas that's, you know, that can actually put them in a better position. Okay, so, and then I will bring a feminist reaction. Again, there are many feminist reactions, but I'm just giving you some of them because I only have 15 minutes. So I'll bring in one for Marie Humé. Marie Humé is, and I quite agree with what she said, you know, and that this is a direct response to Femi Ojo, who sounded very misogynistic. So Mel, like, she might sound harsh, but you can understand in that context, I'll say she was right, because the main point that she's making here is that, you know, as a man, you cannot understand a woman's position. It's only women who can speak on women's behalf, who can better speak, if I can say that, on women's behalf. So it doesn't understand what it means to be a woman, because it's clearly speaking with that from a male position, from dominant position, and it's sometimes hard when you speak from that position to understand others, unless you start really paying attention. Okay, so I'm returning again to my big question. So how do we go back to how women can go back into that position of importance? So here I'm quoting Maya Maba herself. So she mentioned that women must take responsibilities, and that's been happening. You know, there are women associations and all of that, so I'm not going to go in details. And they must not accept the praise of the African mother. That's what Femi was referring to. So you are complaining, if you know we are singing that you are Mother Africa, so why are you complaining? So Maya is saying we need to reject that, because that just, it's too idealistic. You know, in reality, we are still being discriminated, and we're still not being taken as equal to men. So we need to reject that. So, and then I'm handing with Azodo, is also making a good point here to present the women in a better light. Okay, so this is, but things have changed. You know, I don't want to believe that it's all gloomy, and you know, things have been changing, and so we moved from there to young African writers. I will name one of them, Adichie. You know, I don't know if Adichie is one of the young African writers, and she's, if you look at read their novels, you will see stronger female characters. So things have changed, you know. And I also like this quote from Adichie that you know, with power, you can, you know, power gives you the, you know, with power, you can act with writing, you know, because here we're talking about writing novel and so forth. So writing actually gives you that power to tell the story. You know, obviously there are economic reasons, because who writes for who? You know, you have to have the means to write, or money, or to publish. You know, but if you do that, then you can make someone's story definitive. And here, this is where I want to bring my own research and to show you that how translation is very important, because we often think about, we see the writer, but we don't think about the translator, because the translator also has the power to make your story definitive. When he leaves, let's say, the African context, he goes to the Japanese context, because there are African novels translated into Japanese, you know. So the one who translates can make those African women's lived experiences definitive. You know, they might be distorted, but for the Japanese people, they will know that this is how African women are, because this is what we're reading. You know, so you know, and then I'm bringing my own research. As I said before, I'm using feminist approaches to translation. And just to give you a brief history, feminist translation, it was established in Canada, and it was in reaction of it was a combination of second wave feminism and then écriture féminine, because in French, the language is very masculine. You know, you refer to the neutral. You know, the neutral. You use the masculine to refer to the neutral. You know, so all these women had issues with all that. So they wanted to have a neutral language. So they started to write, and also the main aim of translation is to correct anything that is detrimental to women. And when we say here feminist truth, this is a bit subjective, but it just means that you know, it is to be adapted to every context. You know, because truths are different depending on where you are. Again, it's a question of your position, whether you live in Japan, in France, in South Africa. The truths are different, but you have to do something that is not detrimental to women when you are translating. You know, so you have to correct. And feminist translation, it's political. It's political, so it's engaged. You can correct anything that is detrimental. And I'll give you an example. So just briefly about what I'm doing in my own research. So I'm just looking at African Francophone novel, including Mariam Abbas' novel, translated into Russian. This is what I'm looking at. And I'm just comparing them, you know, I'm seeing any shift in translation. So that tells me that the translation, the Russian translation, if she corrects or she deletes anything, that means she has an issue with that, you know, because translators are what we call gatekeepers, you know, they're gatekeepers. So when they translate a novel into their own culture, they can pick and choose, you know, and, you know, and the novel I'm looking at were translated during the Soviet Union. You know, Soviet Union was very, it's political. It's political. So, right. So I'm going to give you an example just to give you more. So, for example, this is a you might have seen it if you work in literature. You know, it's quite used. It's been used a lot in people's articles. So that's why I'm using it. So, Madame Abba here, she's using a. She's saying, elles sont plus de stabilité pour devenant une chose au service de l'homme. So she's using une chose, a thing. That's the English version for you. So she shows it thing. And in French, it's very offensive. It's very offensive. It's very dehumanizing to say, you know, to suggest that a woman can be, you know, considered as a thing, you know. But she's using that male French language, because that's what she's been taught as a woman. Because women speak, we say that in translation, they speak two languages. They speak the male language and the feminine language. So women they speak both languages. And when they write, you can see women writing in the male language. And this is what she's using, because maybe she doesn't have any other option. But what does the Russian translation does? It says, ей приходится жертва собой и покорно служить мужу. And the Russian translation here says she has to sacrifice herself and obediently serve her husband. So we still get the idea but it is offensive in the Russian context. You know, they have not used the word thing. You know, thing in Russian it's object. It's like the same object. You know, they have not used it because it's offensive. Because Russian at that time, it was a country where you had a female astronaut, women. You know, Russia was a country where women had abortion rights. Abortion rights were in Russia. It was not even in Western Europe. So Russia was quite. I'm talking about Soviet Russia because it's Soviet Union. So Soviet Union was a bit advanced, if in terms of some women rights. You know, like abortion rights and all that. So you see, for them, it's for that women, Russian women translating, that wasn't acceptable. And she's applied what we call feminist translation. So translating women not in a way that is detrimental to them. So I'll give another example. And that's, it's just called supplementing, just changing that to a word that is less offensive. And I'll give you another one. This is more extreme because he's saying, je n'ai jamais conçu le bonheur hors du couple. So I'm just taking my words, see if I go enough time left. Yeah, in here, it's this is Mariam Abbas speaking. Je n'ai jamais conçu le bonheur hors du couple. So I have never conceived of happiness outside a couple. So this is what one of our cultures is saying. You know, like you know, happiness can only be seen in a couple, and this is a feminist consciousness. But again, when it goes to Russia, the Russian translation seems to have a problem with the word happiness. You know, because this seems to suggest that you can only be happy in a couple. So again, in a Soviet context, women had divorce laws were there. You know, the women could divorce. You know, so there were all these laws, and so here again, you know, it wasn't acceptable. So it has been changed to this. You know, again, it's completely different, and we call that a hijacking in feminist translation. Just, you know, change completely the meaning of it. Okay, and so that's just to show that you know, we can actually use. There are many examples like this. So we can also see the Bible. You know, the Bible has been changed, and it's kind of gender neutral Bible. You know, so it can be done in any context. Like for example, in African context, we have tales, we have stories written. You know, centuries ago, and if in any way they are offensive, you know, and they can be offensive to a man and to a woman as well, you know, that I think that's what we need to change, and I hope I can see more also in the African context. Okay, and last, this is my conclusion. So my conclusion. So you know, I'm talking about solidarity first, because solidarity it's a good thing that women have been doing for a long time, you know. And I want to bring Mohanty, because right now people are talking about feminists being, Western feminists being the dominant mode of feminism. They need to pay attention. And I think it's valid points, you know, when we want to talk about feminist solidarity, we need to do it in a way that does not colonize other people, you know, ideas. Okay, and also I want to bring the fact that translation is very important. Translation is very important because if you are to be translated to different contexts, you know, it needs to be done in a way that's not detrimental to you. And finally, we need more men in feminists. We need men, you know, because you know, you always need we need people, men in feminists, and it's sad that we don't get much men, but I am one of them, and I call myself feminist, you know, and I'm proud to say that. And I wish there can be more African men or more ethnic minorities men actually into feminism, because we all have a mother. We all have a mother. I know I'm being a bit emotional, but I feel strongly about it. You know, we wouldn't want our own mother to be treated badly. And then but also I would prefer that here I'm quoting Elizabeth Batin. She's a French feminist, but again she's written a lot on masculinities, but I would like also in an African context, or just in general, if we can come out with better terms, because Batin is using the term soft man, and that has been used by Mutunda while reviewing some African novels, saying like, oh, these men who view women as equal, we can refer to them as effeminates. That's offensive to me as a man, because if I am a feminist, I don't want to be called soft man, because what does it mean to be called soft? So I'll just end on that note that if we could have, we could also use better term in order to attract more men into feminism and into literature and in general. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mukile. I've changed my headphones in the room. Can you still hear me? Okay, I'll try to speak up. If you cannot hear me, just give me a second.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mukile. This is super interesting and very, very great last note, of course. Makes me very happy when you say we need more men in feminism. And yeah, that's just, that's the truth. That's all we need. For everyone that has just come in, welcome to this event of the African Research Network. If you have any questions from Mukile, I invite you to write them down in the chat so we can discuss them. We are a small group today, so it would be really nice if we could discuss them on video in person, if you would like. So go ahead, throw your questions out there, and we will have a nice discussion about it. Now it's time for the presentation of Yasmina, and after that we will do the Q&A. So Yasmina, she is the South Guinean writer and a poet with a background in political economy and African studies. She is currently working as a communications assistant at a local Guinean NGO, and she's also writing as a freelancer on the side. Some of her work can already be found on her blog and in her debut poetry collection, which is called Anos Manda, if I'm saying it wrong, which is published at Verve Poetry Press. So go out and look for that. She will talk today about the problems, constraints, and privileges of the native, the local, and indigenous researchers, both in the interlocutor of their own community and the influence of the global academic world. So I will now give the floor to Yasmina. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my presentation is kind of like a reflexive kind of thing, based on my own experience doing my master's in African studies and as like a freelancer. 1 second while I share. Okay. So, I started with a quote that's in different moments, anthropology has imagined itself to be a voice, and in some disciplinary iterations, the voice of the colonized, this modern interlocutionary role was not self-ascribed by anthropologists, nor was it without a serious material and ideational context. It accorded with the imperatives of empire, and in this, specific technologies of rule that sought to obtain space and resources to define and know the difference that it constructed in those spaces, and then to govern those within. And so, my presentation is just kind of like, I'm going to be talking about what your identity means when you are carrying out research, and the way that you perceive yourself versus the way the world perceives you will affect how you have access to knowledge and how you can articulate that knowledge. So positionality is, like I just said, describing your position in relation to a particular research. And in African studies, studying Africa as an African gives me this kind of like insider knowledge that people suggest that I have, but also as a diaspora person, I'm also an outsider in many ways because I don't have the in the know that people would have if they were born and raised in Guinea-Bissau. And so there's like a lot of dichotomies that we need to kind of break down, this insider, outsider, objective versus subjective kind of thing. And I have that later on. I didn't structure this very well, by the way. So I'm gonna just like talk, and it's gonna be part of a bunch of different slides. But you know, our identities, and depending on where we fall in those intersectionalities will determine the power that we have in particular situations. So if you are a white man, you have this kind of like self-proclaimed power, and you can enter into any space that you want and produce all the knowledge that you want about people and about the world. And this has kind of like dictated the world that we live in, right? Myself as a Black woman have less access to that knowledge. And then, you know, if I go to a country where they don't speak English, for example, then I have less access to knowledge that is going to be provided in some of the local languages. If I am a woman, I might not be like led into some spaces that are only allowed, like only men are allowed in there. Because I'm Christian, I might not be allowed in like Muslim spaces, for example. And some of these are very obvious identities. Other identities, like the fact of me being Christian, is not so obvious. The fact of me being a woman, you know, I would say that's obvious, but then that highlights my own bias, this heteronormative bias. And these are the things that we need to be like reflecting on when carrying out our research, so that we know our position in kind of like researching whatever it is that we are researching. And so a lot of what I'm saying now is based on even Tuck, and I have like the references in the end that you guys can like look into. And they talk a lot about like being a person who studies their own community. You have to think about why you're studying it in particular, because there are things that people tell you are important that we must study, but there are some things that even Tuck suggests that, you know, the academy doesn't deserve it. Some knowledges are sacred and to be kept within that space. And you know, should we prioritize the Western gaze here, or prioritize the desires of the communities that actually you want to study? And when I talk about like my positionality in doing African studies, there aren't a lot of people that do African studies who are African, at least not in my experience at the University of Birmingham. I had a lot of white European teachers, a lot of like white European fellow students. It was a handful of us that did African studies. And even coming back to Africa and telling some of my former teachers that I was studying this, the automatic response was like, well, why, you're already African? So why are you studying African studies? And I thought that this was an interesting response. And it suggests that, you know, the design of the course, which is another quote that I have in there, and the design of a lot of like social sciences was made from this kind of Western imperial position that assumes that white Western forms of knowledge, ways of knowing, ways of accumulating knowledge is what makes them inherently superior, and they have the language and tools to understand themselves and to understand others, and that's what gives them dominance over them. And so studying Africa, which isn't to suggest that we are a monolith, but studying Africa, studying my own community is in itself a form of resistance, because I am self-reflexive, because I know myself, then I can center myself in my own narrative and center those like me in my own narrative, which I think is what I'm like driving to. When the subaltern can speak, we have to wonder, like, who are we speaking to? And I think in my work as a freelance writer, I've grown very wary of kind of like speaking to Western people and telling them, you know, you should not be racist, you should not do this, you should not do that, and rather generating knowledge about myself, for myself, and the people who identify with me, so that we can center ourselves and remove this kind of like dependency on Western validation of our knowledge. And this is just kind of like this is what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, what do we gain from being our own interlocutors? What do we gain from centering ourselves in not only doing the research, but in who we are speaking to? And I think this is an important like place of decolonization. And I have some further reading and references in there. I hope that made sense. It was kind of like all over the place. Yeah, so that was that.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. This is super interesting. Could you keep up your slides? Yes, this was very interesting. I had never heard about positionality as a term before. So, if I may ask a question already, is that related to racial identity or?
Yes, so it's racial identity, but also nationality. It's also gender. It's also sexuality. So anything that defines your identity in this world that is so like keen on putting labels and how that affects the way you navigate the world. Yeah, that affects your position in it.
Right. And then what's the difference between that and intersectionality?
So intersectionality is just the different positions that you hold. And so Black woman, Christian, I'm also an Afro-pessimist, which is one of like my invisible identities that's going to affect it. And that's just, I think your intersectionality defines your positionality kind of thing.
Great, wow, thank you. That's super interesting and super helpful to understand any identity and social identity. So now it's up for the Q&A and discussion. So I would like to invite all participants.
Okay, and thank you so much, Sheila, and thanks the presenters. And I'm a participant too, and I want to ask a question to Mukile and one to Yasmina as the panel started. The first question that we asked to Mukile has to do with his own experience as a male feminist scholar who has identified his position as well as his, what accommodates him within the framework of intersectionality, what accommodates a scholar like him. So the question I'm asking him is this, that do you believe that there is a kind of ontological difference between male and female, that you think that this comes into play when it comes to scholarship? Do you think that, you know, like some people trying to talk about biological difference and psychological differences and all this other stuff? That's the question to you. And then my question to Yasmina has to do a little bit with the African studies that she has narrated, being a student of African studies. Do you think that you trust when non-Africans make their analysis of issues and phenomena in Africa? That's one. And then two is, do you think that their position justifies some of the evaluation and how some of these things are interpreted? Do you think it justifies that? So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your question, Augustine. I've noted the first one. What can accommodate me in terms of feminism? If I would say that when I go to women's conferences, I tend to be, there are men, but there is very few men, and I think that's because is just that's mean that because we men we're already in a dominant group, we're already there. So I think it's only women can speak can speak well to about their own issues. I can't speak on behalf of women, but what I can be is I can be an ally. I can be an ally, and this is what I see myself as an ally to women causes. But I cannot see it through. But I can only see through male lens. But that's what I can do, really. And the other part of your question, I didn't really write it down. You asked me kind of two things.
Yeah, the other part has to do with ontological, psychological, or whatever difference that some people have argued that actually differentiates men from women, and how that plays a role in scholarship.
Okay, that's a big question. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer that question, but I can say that in translation studies, there are studies that's about the fact that women and men translate differently, differently. But it's something that's it's still ongoing. It's still ongoing. So it's not like I came across small studies, saying that women translate in a certain way, and it has to do with your background and all of that. But I don't really have an answer to that, if that makes sense. It's a tough question.
Shall I? So your question was, do I trust the kind of like interpretations from non-Africans in African studies? I think it's more nuanced than that. I don't think that the fact of being non-African doesn't mean that you don't have valid interpretations. I think that it's important, though, that we recognize wherever we may stand in our position, that we know the power that our identities have in studying a particular subject. So a white person studying Africa, you have to recognize that white privilege is going to affect your interpretation of whatever it is that you're studying, which isn't to say that you can't have, I might agree with your analysis. Like sometimes I agree with you. There's European Afro-pessimists and European Marxists that I align with more closely than African scholars who are actually pro-capitalism and, don't have a kind of a class analysis of the continent. And so I think it's more nuanced than saying, because you are European, I don't trust your analysis on Africa. I don't think it's that simple. So that's kind of where I stand. I think it's important to recognize your power when you are studying anything. And that should be stated from the beginning. Like say, if I were to write about the SARS protests right now in Nigeria, I would have to recognize I am not a Nigerian. I am not present in Nigeria at the moment. And so this is coming from a place where, I'm looking from this particular position, and you make of that as you will, but this is how I analyze and interpret everything. And you can associate that to my identity, my, the framework within which I want to look at it. Yes, so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. For all participants, if you have a question, please shoot in the chat or unmute yourself, raise your hand, and we can address your question too. I'll wait a bit for you. Vanessa, would you like to?
Yes, hi. I wanted to talk about Yasmina's presentation. I found particularly interesting this idea that you were saying about how studying your own community can be a form of resistance. I find that a really good idea. But I also wanted to talk. From my own background, I have a different background. I actually come from the South American Andes, and I work in art history. And I often feel that every time I want to do an art historical study about my own culture, the kind of idea that instead of working in art history, you should work in Latin American studies. So I'm also interested in what you think about how this idea of studying your own community can become sort of restrictive, that the fact that you are not Western means that you can only talk about your culture and only in the context of your culture, of that kind of studies, like Latin American studies or Black studies.
Sorry, just to clarify, you're asking what, like the critique that we only study our own is
yes, like what's your idea about that? Because again, as you said, it can be a form of resistance, but then in some context it can also be quite restrictive.
Yeah, I think that would come down to evaluating the reasons why you're doing it. I think, I want to give individuals like their own agency. Why are you trying to study this? Also, there's this like whole idea of objectivity and subjectivity that comes into play, and people assume that because you are of that culture, you cannot be objective in the study. And I think that I don't think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I don't know. I think it would come down to your individual motivations. But also, and this is in the Even Tuck paper, not everything should be studied. And I think if a community is kind of like resisting it, then that is their prerogative. And, you know, if some knowledges are sacred, then, you know, being part of that community or not, some things ought to be respected. I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, it really helps. I really like what you said about the whole idea that you can be objective. It's something to have in mind, definitely. That some people would say that, but yes, it doesn't mean that it's actually true.
Yeah, if I were to come in a little bit, I feel that indigenous scholars get caught in between, because it's like if you study a phenomenon in your continent or in your world, the Western society and some European scholars and reviewers may consider it or judge it as not being objective. And some people can cite instances in which they have fixed that. And if you study other words, you may consider incompetent, maybe linguistically incompetent, or you have not. So you find yourself a little bit constrained, and you find a lot of African scholars writing and trying to talk about this constraint that when, or dilemma, in which they seems to be put in between, and they consider incompetent on either part. But I wonder why this does not have a role to play, as Medina is saying, in other form of scholarship, because we have European studies, and Russians or Americans or British or French people are not considered incompetent in studying theirs, neither are they considered incompetent in studying Africa. And that's where I think we can also take a look at
and just to add to that, I think even in like studying political economy in my undergraduate, we spent most of our time actually studying America and the UK, doing like reading by Americans and British people. And so there's this assumption that, you know, politics, history, etc., is already so centered on the Anglo-American tradition, and they don't see it as them studying themselves, but that's literally what they're doing. They just decided not to call it European and American studies because they call it politics, and they assume themselves to be the center. And so that's not them studying themselves, but quite literally that's what they're doing.
Yes, this is a very interesting question. Thank you, Vanessa, for this. It also links in, I think, to what Mukile talked about earlier about the sort of false neutrality, which showed with French language, that the masculine is taken as a neutral term, while in fact it isn't. Do you maybe have any thoughts on this as well, Mukile?
Hello, sorry.
Yeah, do you maybe have any thoughts on this sort of position of neutrality? And
I was just thinking as you were talking about Spivak, because I don't know if you heard about Spivak, and Spivak has written a lot about speaking for others, speaking on behalf of others, and you know, I think the main thing is just to acknowledge your own position, you know, because I can be living in Africa right now and writing about some other indigenous people, but who am I to speak on their behalf, you know? Because I might be some kind of middle-class professor based in Africa and writing about some, you know, who am I, you know, maybe you're not the one that can speak on their behalf. So Spivak has written a lot about that, and I do refer to her in my research, you know, in relation to men, you know, because men tend to speak on behalf of women as well, in most cases. So I think it can happen it's very important issue to be aware of in your own research. And in our last seminar, so it's event, webinar, we had a lady from Dublin who asked the same question. There was a conference on the Congo, on the Congo, the Belgian Congo. There have been a genocide. There have been, King Leopold as so, and she said that on the panel, there was only white Europeans, So this is 2020, 2020. So I mean, there are Congolese scholars who has written about Congo as well, So I mean, it's always good to challenge yourself by bringing other people's view, So I don't think any problem having different people from different backgrounds working on one subject. For example, when I started my PhD, I'm the only Black person in the department, and and my supervisor told me, you are writing about, because I do write about Russian people, but I'm not Russian, And so while most researchers in the Russian department, they are Russians themselves, So if they can do that, I'm sure African people can write about Africans. If you go to the Indian can write about Indian, and Caribbean about Caribbean, everyone can do that. But just to challenge yourself, I think it would be good to have other people who work on the same subject, but they're not necessarily Black or they're not necessarily white. If you are white, it's just kind of to get that different thing, insights. All right, that's my take on it.
Yeah, and it really becomes really problematic when there's only one type of ethnicity studying. Yeah, a whole lot of different peoples as a subject. Are there any other questions from the participants?
There's a question to Mukile with regards to translation studies, and the question tried to ask that with regards to editorial and publication, what do you say about positionality and of African scholars and prospects and challenges that has been faced in this regard?
Okay, thanks for the question. What I will say, there are many challenges, and also I'll just draw on my own experience, because I am also currently have an article that's it's under review, and before setting it to the journal, and I had a chance to be at the conference, and I spoke to an editor-in-chief of a big journal in Europe. I don't want to name it because I don't want to get in trouble. But and I spoke to him. I said, look, I do translation between African, Africa and Russia and so forth. And said, can I send my paper to your journal? Like this is what I'm discussing, And then he said that first of all, he told me he will have a problem because it doesn't have any reviewer who does Africa. I mean, who works on Africa, like literature or anything. So that was the first challenge. And the second challenge, he told me he doesn't have anyone who knows Russian. So because I'm moving from French into Russian, but I'm writing in English. So I need someone to understand all these three languages. And so, but the first one, I think that's the most relevant one, because he doesn't have anyone who understands African literature. And so I think that's the biggest one, because it just shows that, yes, we want to publish in big journals, but if no one understands your literature, or your notions you want to use in that research, so how can you, it's difficult. And but eventually I managed to find an American journal. That's where my paper is being reviewed. And yeah, but I would say it was hard. Yeah, it was hard for me to. I spent nearly 6 months trying to find the right journal. And I mean, for me personally, the way to resolve this is just to have people studying and hopefully becoming reviewers in those famous journals, so that they have more reviewers who understand different cultures, and it's only that way that they can bring more diversity or more diverse journals. That's my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. The academic world is so focused on English language, maybe a little bit on French language as well, but then, yeah, it's really a privilege. English language and being able to study at university, being able to publish. Another thing that should really change. I have another question for Yasmina. Augustine, if you would like to take the floor, or would you like me to?
There's a hands up from Abbas.
Yes. I just want to make some remarks. Thank you for those presentation, Mukile and Yasmina. On the issue of positionality, I think we just have to start being a gatekeeper of our knowledge, and at the same time, we have to, stop the process of knowing Africa for the reason of exploitation. And I believe that the deployment of rage is a very productive theory-making exercise, and the way that the scholarship of resistance is, springing, and the way it's surging, it's a call for us to know that there is need for us to start looking at the relationship between decolonial thinking and the global economy of knowledge. So some would say we don't have to be too radical about the decolonial turn. Some would say we just have to see how we can manage the call for decolonization and what is actually happening in a global scale. But however, I think what's decolonial thinking, or the fact that we want to be reading or hearing or writing from our perspective as African scholars, is just trying to shift the geography of reason. As some people have said here, that you see majority of fields or disciplines are being dominated by Euro-American scholars, and everything is around that particular center. So instead of continuing like this, so we just have to keep pushing around the need for an epistemic freedom, which is a just cause. It is a justice project that we have to keep working on. So, but I'm going to end my remark on what Bonaventure de Sousa Santos said around ecology of knowledge, and where we can be able to allow or cleave into different spheres or areas of knowledge, and instead of maintaining a singular view or singular stance of knowing, then we should appreciate the fact that people have different ways of knowing, or different ways of creating their identity, and the right to self-writing or even self-identification. So, and that's ended with plurality of knowledge, or knowledges, as he said. So that's it. Thank you very much for the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abbas, for this question about the economy of knowledge, right? Or did you say ecology? Pass it off to Yasmina.
Yeah, I agree with with the beginning of what you said, making use of the rage. I think that's so important. I think for so long our rage has kind of been used to police us, and then they do up respectability politics. Oh, well, why are you so angry? We'll hear you better if you're not angry, but we have reason to be angry for a lot of things. But also I worry that we might end up limiting ourselves to anger and pain, which is already what they ask us to perform for their studies. And, you know, our condition, if you will, is so much more than just what we go through. And I think by decentering, you know, Westernism or decentering anything other than ourselves will come with a lot of freedom, and we'll end up studying whatever we want to study, including our anger. And then that would end up being fantastic.
MB's hand is up.
Yes, I see. Was this your question, Abbas? Do you have any response?
Yeah, I think that was just a remark, basically. Yeah, thank you very much for the contributions.
Thank you. Bill, I will ask you to unmute now, so you can ask the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hello. Yes, sorry for coming in a bit late here. But I've just been intrigued by the discussion by Yasmina, African Studies. And I'm thankful for this presentation because I've always had African Studies, and to be honest, I've always looked at it from outside in, as in, just as she said earlier on in her presentation, that generally seen as something done by the Western guys. And my take has always been, oh, these guys don't know about Africa, and they really have to study to find out things. Just as in my school, when I was at school, we used actually to study about European history and everything about European. We studied everything about the world other than Africa. So I thought, oh, there's always been a need for us as Africans to learn about the rest of the world, just as there is a need for people outside of Africa to learn out about Africa. But from her presentation, if I got this right, if there is such a thing as African studies, I mean, Africa being such a big sphere compared to the rest of the world, because if I say European, let's say European studies, vast as the physical Europe is, in most cases, we are talking about sort of a singular entity. But when we talk about Africa, from my perspective, I come from Uganda, and we know Africa has so many countries, over 50. And when we boil it down to the specific country, Uganda alone has over 50 different languages. So from my area where I was born, if I travel 10 miles any direction, I'll be lost what they're talking about. Now, bearing that in mind, how do we then approach Africa as a whole? And could there even be a thing as African studies? I don't know whether I'm bringing out what I'm trying to ask here clearly, but I wonder if Yasmina can help me really to shed some light on this.
Yeah, I agree completely, but I don't think, at least not in my experience in the department, they're not trying to assume that we are all the same. But what ends up happening is that they prioritize some very few countries on the African continent, and then very few ethnic groups in those countries as well. And so in the department in Birmingham, at the University of Birmingham, it was mostly like specialists in Nigeria, and then you have a little bit about South Africa, a little bit about Kenya, but you know, there's very few places that are prioritized. Ghana as well was prioritized, and there's very little about the French-speaking African world, and then even less about the Portuguese-speaking world. And I think that, you know, by saying African studies, I don't think that, you know, people assume that it is a singular framework through which you are studying all African communities, but rather you are studying the communities that are in Africa, so it's African studies. And then there's this like circle, it just reminds me of, you know, at the beginning of my master's, they created a circle, and then when you go to university, the boundary pushes outwards because you have a lot of general knowledge. And then when you do a master's degree of specializing, and then it's that circle doesn't expand, it's just like a single point on that circle peaks upward. And then when you do a PhD, it's even more specific and that peaks upward again. And so in whatever you study, you're not just assuming that this is giving you universal knowledge about Africa. You just have more knowledge about a very specific context, a very specific people in a very specific place and time. And I think that's maybe what we need to start talking about more openly in the academy. Like, you're not creating universal knowledge. You're just developing more knowledge on a very, very specific thing. I don't know if that answers the question.
Hello?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Yasmin. Actually, that answers the question. And I think, the example you've just given over a pyramid, like, when you started like your master's, the studies are kind of broad, and then just as you go higher, PhD becomes narrow on top. However, in that case, looking at the base, the very base of the pyramid, perhaps even before your master's, don't you think then the term African studies can be misleading? Because to a layman like myself, I mean, I'm an engineer, scientist kind of thing, just at the sound of the word African studies, I just assume automatically that we are tackling the bull in its entirety. And I'm thinking, okay, being an African man myself with, some subjective understanding of Africa, or shall I say Uganda specifically, I can even ask, how can that be? Because cultures within my own country, which is just a tiny dot of Africa, the cultures are so diverse, so much so that they are so different just from one corner of the country to the bottom of the country, and just that one country of Africa. So is there another, I don't know, term to make it more?
I think perhaps it's an issue of marketing then, because African studies is just your study in politics and history and anthropology and cultural studies. It's just within the context of Africa. And I guess you could end up making that about wherever you like. And so maybe that's an issue of marketing, because when we say African studies, it's not a framework, it's just you're focusing on the continent rather than Europe. But even so, like, a lot of the people I read were Western scholars. And so
even though that you studied African studies, most of the things you read were by white Western.
Yeah, a lot of it. Maybe not most. I think a lot of my lecturers were actually very aware that it's a very colonized kind of area, but a lot of who I studied, a lot of people who taught me were, not African.
So I just want to add something to what Bill said. Okay, there was an instance just recently on Twitter when Kennedy Andrews, I think, was commenting about the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that. And people were coming at him because he was presented as professor of Black studies. So there's so many questions about why would someone be, why would there be a Black study or some kind of, and people were saying every other study have been white studies, because it doesn't have to be named white studies before we know that it's white study. So we talk philosophy, largely sciences, and some basic disciplines have been white studies. So if someone chooses to say, okay, this is my area of concentration, this is my field, this is my discipline, then they should be fun about it. But on the other hand, to present a singular African worldview is not strictly true, is not possible. So, but I think the essence of having all this disciplinary ideology of, say, we have, or even for market reason, as Yasmina said, is just for us to be able to understand some issues around how things are affecting people, how things are affecting us in terms of epistemology, in terms of even the situation where we see most African universities are not even African. So we just have to, in diaspora, or say outside Africa, people should have the ability to think epistemically in an African way, or even write about Africa as Africans. So we should be able to, read or write or even study Africa from whatever point of view we are as Africans, even if we are not socially located in Africa, but we have the opportunity of being epistemically located in Africa. So that is just the only the reason I have about people having courses or deciding to go into a particular field. But it is possible that we can learn from our diversity as a continent, and work on that to strengthen our development, our growth as a continent going forward. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you, Abbas, for your comments. If Mukile or Yasmina would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I just want to make just a quick comment. When you mentioned that you went to a conference, someone mentioned the white studies. I just wanted to react, just to give my own thought. I think it reminds me when I hear when someone say Black Lives Matter, someone say White Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter. It reminds me of that conversation, because when people are saying Black studies, white studies, what does it mean? What is whiteness? First of all, what is it's just to me, it sounds like someone just kind of not very doesn't like the idea. That's what he tells me. But there's no such. If when I went to a conference with Professor Kehindre, and when he mentioned Black studies, it was mostly to do with diaspora. So it's Black, but in the diaspora. So it's kind of very specific. It's okay, not about every Black person on earth, but it's Black and in the diaspora, in a specific country. So that's why someone say white studies to me, I'll ask them to clarify what is whiteness, what they want to, it's just a thought I wanted to, just a comment I wanted to and again, when we say African studies, I mean, we just kind of, in science, we tend to categorize people. I mean, you can talk about Nigerian studies, why not? You can even go further, say Yoruba studies, why not? I mean, it's just kind of grouping people to make it easy to show what you're working on, So African studies is kind of general. You can talk about Congo study, Nigerian studies, Ghanaian studies, and you can even deeper mention some tribes or some ethnicities. I mean, it's just kind of grouping people. It should not really be such an issue. Like I work in a Russian department, they call it Russian studies, So it's just a thought. Thank you.
And if I might comment a little bit with this, I found that there have been some articles, some professors in Africa trying to argue that African studies should take place in Africa. And that should be what people who want to even study it in other parts of the world should go to African nations to actually be able to fix some of this, because I feel that it has to do with the history of some of these studies themselves, whether translation studies, whether cultural studies or African studies. The history has to be with anthropologists and sociologists and some people going to Africa. And how documentary are being run on animals in the geological stations is the way they are running documentary on them. They don't understand the language, they don't understand the culture, they don't understand this, and you observe, and at the end of observation, you give interpretation. And all this constitute the bedrock of the epistemic, the framework, the overall framework, which is still being withheld. And sometimes you ask the question that when those things are challenged a little bit, it turns to like, where are the written documentation? But the question I always ask Yasmina, which is in line with a comment that was passed here by Cesare or Fletcher, has to do with what could you have learned better if you have studied African, you're studying Africa, and what have you also learned better if as you have studied it in Europe? How do you do the comparison so that we can be able to address the concern of those African scholars based on the origin of some of these disciplines?
I'm thinking about like my motivations for doing African studies. I went into the course having already like my own kind of foundations in political economy and the kind of frameworks that I prefer when I study the world in general. African studies was just kind of like a decision to prioritize Africa in my academy, because I had for so long already prioritized everyone else. Not, I don't know, it wasn't really about, like, I was in Africa studying Europe, and so I can be anywhere in the world studying Africa kind of thing. You just have to do it well. And I think that's really the issue. It's not about where you are, it's about how you do it. Like, they did a very good job at teaching me about Nazi Germany when I was in Namibia, for example. So, you know, you can exist in Europe and be taught really well. It's just you have to prioritize wanting to learn about, you know, politics and history within the African context. And I think those were my motivations for doing African studies.
Yes, thanks, Yasmina. It's a hot topic, African studies, and there are a lot of interesting comments. There's now in the chat now. I will just highlight the one from Cesare, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. She's writing, as an African-American woman, this conversation is fascinating. The assertion that one needs permission from another group to study their own story. I am an other in America as a woman and being a child of Africa. And also in Africa, I am an other when I seek to understand my story in Africa. I think this is very apt, and I think a lot of people in this conversation will recognize themselves in this otherization that we constantly are experiencing. If there are any other comments on this, I think it's invite you.
Okay, I think since we are on time, so I think the comments, the remark I'll make to this, because I see that what she has said is something very genius, and it actually portrays the idea of positionality and intersectionality that we are really talking about. And part of what I get our speakers today have actually presented is the need for various points of view and the need for departments and units across Europe, even in Africa, to have various scholars from various positions to handle issues. And as she has said too, she's also maintaining a position. So as an African-American woman, she has identity of being a woman and also being an African-American, so which has another history of our own roots, and also being, when she crossed to Africa, identity also changed. And part of this position is what makes conversation to be possible. And it's this, today we will not have, there won't be conversation around positionality and intersectionality, if not that the epistemic justice is still obvious, it's still visible, that part of it has to play as a role in publication, as a role in job placement, as a role in all this. And I thank our speakers and moderators for doing justice to these and calling attention to the need for conversation from every perspective and position. So I think I should thank, starting with the moderator, Sheila, for doing justice to these and this very important and tough topic, and the conversation continued. I thank Mukile Kasongo from Translation Studies, and how he has been able to show he's actually representing us across board. So whatever we can hear or we don't even understand, he will translate it across board and allow the intersectionality. And Yasmina, you know, with our understanding of coming from having studied political science and interested in the issue of African agency and going to take African studies and playing a fundamental role presently in Africa to make a lot of impact, writing blogs, writing all sorts of things, and trying to also tell the narratives. We thank you very much, Yasmina, for coming today. We thank all the participants. We thank those who have always been with us in our discussion, and we thank those who have engaged in the conversation. And I will just share the screen with you on how you can be part of the conversation and how you can also take up a topic, how you can even introduce and collaborate with us. So with regards to our coming event, next month, we have the issue of law and scholars in diaspora. Does the law protect scholars in diaspora? What are the agitations that people who are in diasporas, intellectuals and others, what do they have as something to rest upon? So we have lawyers and scholars, PhD scholars, who will come and do justice to that next month. And December, we're going to have a talk. The title of this one is Talk to Us. So we have people in science, in engineering, in various other fields apart from the humanities. But we talk about how do we collaborate? How do we integrate? So we want to listen to them to understand them, and that will allow interdisciplinary discussion and also give a bedrock to giving certain epistemic framework. We still have a lot of other kind of presentation, and we also allow people mail us, send us email, look at whatever. If you have topic you want to discuss, if you have papers you want to publish on our website, if you have some videos you want to have access to, or scholars that we have featured in the past that you want to have access to. So we have our LinkedIn. You can also connect to us, and also the website is hosted on Humanities Common. And one advantage is you register on Humanities Common, which is free, and you can easily connect with us and also make your profile visible to the global community. So we thank you very much. And I don't know if the speakers and the moderator have the last word. So I just allow everybody to have their words to the participants, their last words. So Sheila?
I will first give the floor to the speakers. If you have some final words for us.
Mukile?
Are you getting the unmute request?
Yep, sorry, yep.
You're asking your final words.
Sorry, yes, thank you for having me. And it was an exciting opportunity to share my work. And for me, the main hope is that, like Augustine say, it transitioned my specialization. So I'm just hope that we can, in an African context, we can look at the issue of feminist translation, because I do believe that we have many African tales, stories, and feminist translation is not just writing or translating what's being done now, but it's also going back. Like, for example, I give you the example of the Bible. There are some gender-neutral Bible. Bible has been published a long time ago. So we have some manual in our school system, manuals, books that might have some kind of masculine language that is demeaning to women or dehumanizing. The task of any feminist translator, male or women, is to go back, even to go back in history, and just retranslate or reword all this, so we have a more inclusive society. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you for having me on this platform. It's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed listening about translation and how that really impacts the way we read certain texts. And I feel like I wasn't necessarily aware of it too much when I was using texts from different languages that were translated, and now I'm going to be paying more close attention to that. But yeah, hopes for the future is just that we don't limit this conversation of positionality to just the academy. We have to recognize our position in the world and how that affects the way we navigate the world and how we treat others, because the privileges that we hold can, you know, like you could use that privilege to help someone else. And so let's not limit that to the academy.
Yes, absolutely. Beautifully spoken, both Mukile and Yasmina. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed moderating this event, listening to your talks about language, nationality, race, positionality, intersectionality, all very important and complicated concepts, but I think most of us here in this moment can identify with it. So it's, yeah, we can really understand the importance of this topic. Finally, I really would like to thank Augustine for organizing this event. Please check out all the comments here in the chat where you can find all the links to the African Research Network. So big heads up for Augustine. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.